Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next graphic novel review. This is going to be my review for The Stoneheart, which is book 2 of the Nameless City series, which is written and art by Faith Erin Hicks with colours by Jordi Belair. So, last year, at roughly the same time of the year, you probably saw me review the first book of this series, which was The Nameless City, book 1. And I gave this a ton of praise at the time. I hugely recommended it to Avatar fans because obviously Faith Erin Hicks has done some work on Avatar comics, and then just the style of this in terms of how character driven it is, the kind of Asian, kind of Eastern inspired kind of setting of it, plus I suppose it has kind of Avatar world building elements, even if it's not like super bending kind of mythical elements. But it's still really, really interesting. Just a week or two ago, book 2 came out, The Stoneheart, and this is a trilogy, so there's one more book to come, so this is the big middle part. And yeah, so I'm here today to review this. Going to keep it pretty much non-spoilers, and not kind of go into too much depth on everything, but obviously, where the Nameless City left off, there was obviously the big assassination attempt against the leader of the Nameless City at this point in time. It was stopped thanks to basically the combined effort of Rat and Kaidu. And basically, that's pretty much where we pick up with book 2. That this kind of friendship between one of the named, someone who actually has their origins in the Nameless City, and someone who has just recently come here, Kaidu, who is obviously from the nation that actually has control of the Nameless City at this point in time. This kind of union of these two has basically helped to stop the leader of the city from being killed. And one of the things that was set up towards the end of the Nameless City was this idea that the leader was going to make an effort to include the named and basically people who represent all of the other nations on basically like a council of leadership. So they basically want to stop the cycle that has been happening within the Nameless City, where the three big nations basically just take turns in capturing the city, and it just, all it leads to is basically more and more people being kind of ousted from a position of power and being basically put into the kind of lower ranks, the poorer classes of the city. And so there's no stability. There's never any stability for the poor people in the city. Like Rat, who is obviously one of the named, who's kind of grown up there all her life. But at the same time, there's generations of people from basically all of the nations who would call the Nameless City their home because they were born there. And they all are kind of in a bad situation just because the reason that they're poor is because they were born into obviously the town when it was, it belonged to their nation. Then it was taken over. They were kind of brought back down. And so the effort now being made by the leader of the city at this point in time is to obviously bring everyone together to try and create this kind of council of all of the different groups of people to create stability and basically bring everyone up, which was part of the conflict in the first book. Here, what we get is basically the leader of the Blades, whose son is named Urzi. We met him in the first book, and basically the focus of him was that he was born in the city. So he basically is in a way is in fear of what happens to so many other people happening to him. That if they allow this council of other nations to kind of come into play and the city gets taken over, he, as someone who basically lives in the palace, if they're ousted from power, where's he going to go? Like, he doesn't want to become like another member of the poor ranks of the city just because someone else took over. And he sees it as his birthright to take over as the leader of the city. And so you begin to see the issues between him and his father. You begin to see like kind of conspiracy plots kind of put into play with him and his kind of, I suppose, just someone who like really he's got on his side, who is Mura, who again we met in the first part. She was kind of training Kaidu initially, and she's basically Urzi's right hand woman, basically. We get some backstory on them in terms of how they met and why I suppose she's so loyal to him, but also insight just into her origin. And I think it's really interesting where they take her character, in that she very much surprises you in terms of kind of what her position on everything is at this point in time, and just how loyal she is to Urzi. So I think that's a lot of the plot of this book, is that almost like the first book is very much Kaidu and Rat focused. This book is, I think, more Urzi and Mura focused. Kaidu and Rat, of course, get their time to shine, but it's very much more of a exploration of the kind of political, I think, aspects of kind of what's going on here, as we begin to get these reveals about certain characters we've met in terms of what nation they are actually originally from. They live in the Nameless City, but are they from Dao, are they from Yusun, or are they from Liao? The three great nations. Like, where is everyone from? Basically, who ousted them from power, and why are they in the position that they're in right now? So there's a lot of kind of situations like that. Kaidu's father becomes a much more, I think, important character in this book, because he's obviously the guy who's kind of mainly behind and came up with the idea for this kind of council of like all of the different kind of groups of people. And you kind of explore more of his relationship with his father as we go on. You kind of get more of Rat's kind of backstory and kind of insight into what's going on there. You get Kaiju's backstory as well, with like him explaining, I suppose, why his family is the way it is, and the kind of power structure of the Dao people, who are obviously the current rulers of the city. I think it's overall really good. I think at times you could definitely accuse the book of maybe spinning its wheels a bit, of just kind of like giving the appearance of kind of really moving things forward, when it's just kind of doing the same thing over and over again without actually moving things forward. It's nothing kind of crazy, but given how fast paced the first book was, in terms of really just moving things forward, I think this one, as the middle part, perhaps doesn't move the story forward as much as you'd think, in that it perhaps is a book that you could definitely accuse of maybe making the story a little bit smaller in a way than it needs to be. They set up some big stuff to happen in part 3 for sure. It's just the way they choose to focus things on here is a little bit kind of odd in terms of the decision making, but for sure there are huge events that happen in here. Surprising how sudden they happen. Some of the lore is kind of delved into, and I think for some people, like, they have to go into it. I think the third book very much is presented to us as you are going to learn about the original people of the Nameless City, but effectively the people who built this city, made it what it was, carved out that kind of path through the mountain that makes this city so important. That's kind of what I think part 3 is going to delve into. They touch on it a bit here. The Stone Heart obviously is the kind of place where all the monks live. It's the kind of monastery place that Kaidu went to in the middle of part 1. And it becomes much more important here because you realize that the monks are obviously the kind of scholars of the city, so they have all of the information. They're the ones who have the important documents about the past, the previous rulers, and most importantly, the original people of this town. And so, the idea here is to strengthen the power of the Dao who are in control right now. What if they got the power that the original people had to make the city what it was? What if the Dao had that all of a sudden? They could really gain a huge power advantage over all of the other nations and properly keep control of the city. But you are definitely seeing that it's this issue between, there's so much tension between the nations that if they make this move to basically bring a council together, they're kind of weakening themselves, because they're basically letting their enemies become allies with them and they're leaving themselves open. But if they do it the other way, where they try to just really put themselves out there on their own as like a powerful entity, they're kind of forgetting about the fact that the city, the Nameless City, is basically made up of people from all of these nations, and that it's just such a varied city that you're kind of forgetting about that. So there's a lot of, again, conflict with regards to that sort of thing. I think that's definitely the most interesting aspect of this book, just how it explores the fact that this town just, there's so many different groups of people, and how, for the most part, they're all against the rulers, but they want this kind of council to form, but then the people who don't want the council to form, like Urzi, and the impact that they can have. It's really good. The art continues to be really, really strong throughout. It's really, really well done, I think. Just, you know, the combination of the lines, the colors, it keeps up absolutely the same quality that the first book had, and I'm so excited to see where they go in part 3. With regards to Kaido and Rat, yes, they remain, you know, the main characters. They are absolutely a focus. It's just definitely the more important stuff, for me, tends to happen with some of the other characters. But here, given that Kaido and Rat are now, like, officially friends, like, they've helped to kind of stop this assassination plot from the end of part 1, she then introduces Kaido to her other friends, and you kind of see Kaido become part of the group. Again, bringing together all these different groups of people, and kind of, you know, breaking down these kind of borders between all these different groups of people and the nations. You really begin to kind of tackle with Rad, kind of, I suppose, how she feels about the fact that she's lived in this kind of monk monastery for so long, but at the same time they have all of these rules, and how if she breaks one of them, she's kind of out of that place, and just the kind of instability of kind of where she lives and what kind of causes it. And, you know, there's some doubts come into play. There's definitely some complex character development going on here, but you know, really interesting still. So yeah, the only real, I suppose, criticism for sure is just that it maybe doesn't advance things as much as you think it should. Given that there's only 3 books in the series, it's just like, where you leave it off here is interesting, but you know, there's still more to come. So the 3rd book is called The Divided Earth, and I would assume that it's going to be coming out April next year, given that the last book came out April last year. April, the 2nd book is April this year, so I assume it's going to be April next year as well. You do get some concept art stuff at the back once again, but it's nothing too fancy. There is a comment from the author, so Faith Erin Hicks gives a brief, you know, discussion of kind of the book, because I don't think there was one of these in part 1, so this is her kind of first time to, I suppose, within the book, kind of explain her kind of research to come to the setting of this book. But yeah, that's the book. That's my review, more or less. So the Stoneheart, book 2 of the Nameless City series. Again, I highly recommend you buy this book. I have the first 2 books in the hardcover form. There is a paperback version available if you're not into spending the extra money for the hardback. It's out on Amazon right now. I think there's a Kindle edition available. Your comic book store, given that it's fairly close to release, may have the book. I believe the way these books and this publisher tends to work is that the comic book store date is more or less the same as the normal bookstore date. So you could find this in pretty much any store, but definitely well worth your time. And again, to Avatar fans, if you're looking for something new and you like comics, graphic novels, you should definitely check this out. Even just read the samples, the preview pages that are available on Amazon for both books. I think it will give you a really cool insight into it. Because especially like the first book, kind of going back to it, just the first couple of pages as they kind of explain to you why the Nameless City is called the Nameless City, it's such a cool concept, and I think it immediately informs you as to kind of what they're going for here. But yeah, that has been my review for The Stoneheart. Highly recommended once again. So excited to see the end of this series with the next book. But yeah, it's been the video. In the comments, let me know if you have any questions, what your thoughts on this book are if you've read it, and also your thoughts on my review. But that's been the video for today. Thanks for watching, and bye.